Welcome everyone who could make it. This is a session, a dialogue on the Anti-Privatisation Forum. And it was designed, we tried to track down as many ex-activists, leaders, affiliate members. I think I sent out an email to about 50 people. We didn't have contacts for everyone. Some of those contacts might have been old because obviously it's been a long time, over 15 years in some ways, I think, since the APF effectively ceased to exist as a functioning organization in around 2011 or so. So there's probably quite a number of people that are out there that maybe we weren't able to reach, although I did get quite a lot of responses from people who said they would try to join us. Anyway, thank you for coming, and appreciate you taking your time on a Saturday to do this. The way we're going to do this is very simple. This is a dialogue, and I've asked Comrade Bricks Mokolo, who's right here. Comrade Bricks was a founder member of the Anti-Privatisation Forum, former chairperson as well, to start us off. And we're going to divide this conversation into three parts. The first part is going to be the formation of the APF, the early years, how that, and Comrade Bricks is going to give a little bit of an input, not too long, because we're not here to have speeches or long inputs. We're here just to give a sort of overview and a framing, and then we have a conversation and dialogue amongst ourselves as to things that people remember, things that they might have, issues that came up there or whatever they were. And then we'll move to a second one, which Comrade John Appolis here, who is also former chairperson, co-founder of the APF, will facilitate and give us a brief little framing about what we call, I think, the high points of the APF, which were those years from the early 2000s to the mid 2000s, and we'll talk about that. We'll do the same format, and then the third one I will facilitate, which will be the serious challenges and the eventual ending of the APF, the implosion of the organization, and some of the lessons there as well, and then we'll have a discussion. So we'll just take it as it comes, and it'll be an open conversation. And those of you who are online, when we get to the point of the dialogue, Comrade Taz, who's at the back there from SWAP, who's our partner, and thank you in this regard. In fact, this is a SWAP really event in many ways, because this is part of a series of sessions that have been happening around remembering movements, and particularly around Fees Must Fall. There have been several events already on WITS campus and with some of the students there over the last several months, and a colloquium that was held just a couple of weeks ago on the same subject matter. So this is part of that. We wanted to expand the sort of reach of this remembering of movements, particularly because this event is in memory of our comrade Prashani Naidu. Prashani was also a co-founder of the Anti-Privatisation Forum, and right from the very beginning was very instrumental in shaping the organization, and then became very actively involved in the first number of years in the APF, particularly with regards to the research committee, and producing some incredible research reports, particularly around water and PD and the prepaid meters, Orange Farm, and so forth. So it's in her memory, and it's also because this is exactly the kind of spaces in remembering these movements that Prashani encouraged for us to do. And so this is, and thank you to the SWAP comrades very much for your support and for facilitating this. And a special mention, obviously, here to Comrade Ahmed, who's sitting next to me. No, Comrade Ahmed, here also. We have to recognize some of the comrades who are in the room before we start. Comrade Ahmed, obviously Prashani's partner for many years, also a co-founder of the Anti-Privatisation Forum, and welcome. And Comrade Trevor, also over here is Comrade Trevor, another co-founder, and all of us were there at the beginning, and also was the organizer of the APF for a number of years as well. Welcome. And then there's comrades here who were active in the APF in one way or the other. Thank you and welcome to all of you, and also those of you online. We appreciate your time. So without, I know we're starting a bit late, But without taking any more time, I'm going to hand over to Comrade Bricks. Comrade Bricks will give us, and Comrade Bricks, you're going to have to come sit here because of the camera. Otherwise, they can't see you over that side. And then you can frame the first section of the early years, and then we'll move. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Dale. Amandla. Amandla. Good afternoon, good comrades. I'm glad for people who came up with this idea of bringing old comrades together after so many, many years. Some we met during the funeral of our comrade, and then her soul rest in peace, Comrade Prishani. She contributed a lot in building the social movement. Many people didn't know anything about the social movement, especially after the unburnings. We remembered the struggle against apartheid, whereby we had civic associations. We had a very strong Val Civic Association who led rent boycott in the Val for many, many years. There are people who never paid rent since 1994. Even today, they're not paying. Aluta continue. And the Soweto Civic Association, we remember all the civics who were leading the struggle, especially the community struggles. And most unfortunate, after the unburnings, Nelson Mandela came up with the SANCO. And people that SANCO is the organization of the people. It's a community, a neutral movement. But we realized that SANCO is not a community alternative organization. It is an ANC. When you follow SANCO, you follow ANC, meaning that people, communities, they don't have their own movement. Fortunately, after 1994, when people were struggling, they didn't know where to go and where to report their problems, there were formations of the community struggles. I remember those days when the Soweto came up with the Electricity Crisis Committee, and then there were winter schools from Kenya College, where people trying to talk more about an alternative. And Orange Farm came up with the water crisis. People were looking for the struggles that they were facing in their own communities. And the introduction of the water prepaid meters, where Comrade Prishani assisted with the research project and make people to understand the water privatization and how people can resist, because when people are fighting, it is not just a down with this and that, without clear understanding of what is the root cause of the problem. Now, the research project that was led by Comrade Prishani helped a lot. You've got one of the comrades from Orange Farm, Comrade Kaiser, who came up with the slogan of down with water prepaid meters and destroy prepaid meters, enjoy free water. That was the holy slogan that that was preached in the everywhere. Even the churches supported the destroy prepaid meter, and because comrades were giving people alternative access to water. Now, anti-privatization was formed to unify the struggles, bringing all the struggles, different struggles from different communities. And we realized that all the struggles are the same. The water crisis committee, the electricity crisis committee, the evictions, all the economic policy, the shift, the change that was made by the ANC government, shifting from the RDP policy to gear policy, and it was the responsibility of Anti-Privatisation Forum to link all the struggles to show people this is same problem, you know. And if Alexander, they've got struggle against evictions, how to link evictions with electricity cut off, how to link electricity cut off with water privatization, prepaid meters. Now, it became easy for people to come together under the banner of the Anti-Privatisation Forum. And we managed to reach even communities that they never thought that they will be shouting slogans against the ANC. There were people saying, down, down with the ANC. And during that time, when we were saying down with the ANC, people were looking at you as an enemy. You know, you are an enemy of the ANC, you are an enemy of the people's organization. But they realized the economic policies, the gear policy, the influence of the multinational corporates into our local municipalities made people to realize that it is ANC who made deals with the capitalist. Now, it was also, you know, anti-privatization helped many people to link privatization with capitalism. Because if you are saying we want free water, it is socialism. And thanks to Comrade Trevor, because we are here today, because this was a powerful message that was coming from you, telling people, no, look, the socialism is this, and capitalism is this. That was free education that was provided by the Anti-Privatization Forum before the vet students marched on the street fighting for free education. Anti-privatization, succeeded to deliver the message. We managed to move as far as Free State, KZN, Cape Town, whereby we had organizations that we're working with. Now, Anti-Privatization Forum was growing day by day. And some of our comrades were infiltrated to extent that when the local government elections came, some people, they thought that they can try, they went to join the other parties with our messages. Because we heard that some other organizations, they were also saying, no, we are anti-privatization, we are this and that and that. Now, but fortunately, we are still there, and we understand that what kind of liberation that people can have. Now, I think today we are facing another struggle, the modern struggles, where there is a lot of confusion. We don't have social movement like anti-privatization today. Now, it is our responsibility to look into the way of trying to revive or to build the social movement. There are people who are trying to find out why we don't have social movement like Anti-Privatization Forum. Now, some people, they think that there is only one social movement that is existing. They mention the abahlali basemjondolo. They think, oh, it's only abahlali who is left. But the Anti-Privatization Forum, we are still there. And there is repetition of what we are struggling for. And they only changed names, changed policies there and there, but the operation is still the same. During the funeral of the Comrade Prishani, we met with some other comrades, and we said, oh, Prishani, she's not gone because her ideas are still there. We still remember her because when we talk, we are referring each and everything to Prishani, especially we from the Orange Farm. We're fortunate because we worked with her and we managed even to write a book about the water privatization struggle. And every time when we are referring, uh, we quote Comrade Prishani. I think her spirit still with us. Prishani is still alive, and we need to make sure that we revive the struggle against privatization. Amandla, thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Comrade Bricks. I think there are a number of things. We're going to concentrate now on just these early years. So let's not shift to the now. We're going to go in a sort of linear, chronological fashion in terms of the development of the APF. Comrade Bricks has talked about that early formation. I think just to add very quickly that one of the key things about that formation was the Anti-Privatization Forum was the first social movement to bring together unions, students, communities, and other activists. So when we had the launch of the APF at WITS, if you remember, that it was basically addressed by Comrade Roger Rani, who was the General Secretary of SAMU at the time, 1999. Was it 2000? Okay, so we had previous meetings in 1999 leading up to that in 2000. And some of the original members were Sapau? No, but I'm talking about the affiliates. It was Sapau, Samu, who else? Nahau, Imatu, and then Kasatu was on board. The students at WITS, in fact, even there were a number of different community organizations. So just to note that that formation was quite multifaceted in the sense of the people that were involved in the organizations, and it was the first time, I believe, that that had happened in the post-1994 South African period where all those movements had come together. It didn't last for very long because we'll talk about that in terms of the ANC and the moving away of the unions. But let's have a dialogue, comrades, about those early years and what comrades would like to say. It's anything. This is open conversation. This is what it is. There's no agenda here. And expressing things. And if those of you online, if you would like to make a contribution, Taz will see you, and then we'll try to, or if you can put your questions onto the chat, then we can try to address those or your comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Hopefully, I don't take too long, but I did want to kind of mark some things that sort of precede the launch that Dale refers to at WITS. The first thing I think that's important is that there were two significant battles that the APF's formation is linked to. The first was the WITS. So at WITS there was a WITS crisis committee that was battling against the WITS 2001 program, which was the outsourcing of involved the outsourcing of most of the kind of non-academic staff within the university. Then, at the same time, there was the Igoli 2002 program, and there was an anti-Igoli forum in the city. At the time as well, the South African Communist Party Johannesburg branch had become sort of sidestepped from the kind of party location. And you had a lot of kind of, I think, like the kind of keep left Trotskyist uh, comrades and so on had, gone into the Johannesburg Central branch. But there was also some other important things that were happening. That were George Dorr and Patrick and them were involved in something called Cancer, Campaign Against Neoliberalism in South Africa. One of and an important link that I don't want to forget is online, but was Nicholas Dealtins and Daniel Hutchinson. And why they were important is they were these students from WITS who were working on these campaigns, but they were across. They were going to cancer meetings. They were going to the Communist Party meetings. They were going to the Anti-Privatisation Forum meetings. And when at Wits, we kind of hit a wall about how to take the anti-Wits 2001 campaign forward. And that was largely because exams were looming. Um, Nahu's own kind of approach was slightly problematic. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that were going on. And what was important then was the calling of a meeting that, if I remember correctly, took place in Kusatu House on top, and that was to kind of target urban futures, a conference that was, I think, Lindsey Bremner was organizing it. Patrick was also involved in the organizing of it. But it was largely a kind of attempt of the city and the university to showcase their individual programs. There were a number of protests around it. We eventually kind of stormed the stage of the Great Hall for the final kind of thing. I do remember there was some debate about the 80 tickets and whether we should come in as participants or whether we were going to protest the conference. Um, Luckily, we decided to not take the 80 tickets and protest it, because I think that solidified a kind of activist orientation that was combative. And that kind of stuck with the APF right through. I do think it's also important to kind of mark that. So a lot of I think at the time, John, if I'm not mistaken, you were chairperson of the Kusatu Joburg, right? Or Gauteng? Wits. Yeah. But a lot of the formations that were part of the Anti-Privatisation Forum then become part of this new grouping that after that then calls itself the Anti-Privatisation Forum. So I think it's important just to kind of mark that. I do think it's also important to remember, and I mean, this is sort of where I disagree with some of Bricks' memory, is that, at the very beginning of the APF was an organization made up of, like, the unions. SASCO was there. I think when we launched the APF, I think Sibongile and John were the first chairpersons, and it was kind of the recognition of bringing these two struggles together, and it was very centered around that. What then happens is, which I think is important, is that so the unions are there. People like Rob Rees, John, so on, they continue to participate, but increasingly what we see is that the union leadership and some of the unions like Nahau and so on that were part of the initial APF, they're not coming to the meetings. An important thing is also AIDC, right? AIDC offices become our office, really, and we also use that space. That gives us a base within Kusatu House. But I think the fundamental shift, and maybe comrades can reflect about how this happens, but as a fundamental shift, as the APF begins to orientate towards community movements, largely also because of the prominence of the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, as well as the Operation Kanyisa, which I think sort of precedes the APF, but there's a kind of important symbiosis in how the SCCC grows and how the APF grows. And that's when other new community movements start coming in. So for me, I just wanted to mark that. I mean, there is the kind of story about when we finally get kicked out of the offices and all of that. And I still consider that part of the early days. Yeah. You know what I mean? Well, very much so. I do think also an important thing is that one of the very important things, why also it's wrong to say the APF still exists and so on, is that the APF gave a floor to movements to meet, to discuss, to plan, to kind of, I can remember all the election debates that we kept having and so on. But I think it was an important place where they developed a cadre of activists within the city. yeah, and so that's the main things that I wanted to mark.
Thanks, Ahmed. Yeah, come sit, come on in, and there's several chairs on that side. Thank you. Okay, there's a comment online you'll share with us. Who else wants to share some of their thoughts, some of their perspectives around these early years? This is around the formation. Hi, Comrade Busa. No, I know. Okay, you didn't. Around the formation. Yeah, you were probably. I think Comrade Busa, you were probably so young at that point. You were. But any other comrades? Yes, Patrick.
Thanks, comrades. And everything I think we've just heard is absolutely right, except you forgot one crucial tactical point: water balloons. And that was down, yes, okay, now I remember. See, absolutely spot on aim at, I think you were aiming at the Director General of Water Affairs at the time, who was, but when I say spot on aim, for the hilarity and the sort of, let's be self-critical and amused about this, who did you actually hit with those water balloons? Might have been you throwing. It was Ben Cashton, who was our left-wing filmmaker, who was making a documentary. He was dripping. His cameras were a mess. So there was a little bit of a, let me call it an aiming problem. And I can just say, I'd like to say a little bit more later when we get to the sort of denouement, that we who were background academics, so we actually got a very substantial, in fact, ultimately an international research project going called Municipal Services Project, and it was with the Queen's University in Canada, and Greg Raters, myself, and David McDonald were directing. But we could feel, partly because so many people were coming to ask, okay, what's the research? And they would tell us, well, but wait a minute, comrades, you in Soweto, you've got free basic water and free basic electricity. And that's what we were being told by the regime in Pretoria. And of course, you have to always ask the activists to give you a correction. I wanted to just quickly make that point. It did exactly, as Ahmed said, create a split in progressive academia. So progressives, not even strong enough to deserve an R. The progressives were very confused about reform or revolution. And you're absolutely right that the Wits urban project, and it might have been because it was the South African Communist Party leader in academia, a wonderful person, Lindsay, but she definitely felt with a Communist Party mayor who within a year or two was authorizing shooting at our constituents in Kensington. Do you remember Amos Masonda? And when you get that sort of confusion or mixed loyalty, of course it penetrates into the academy, into universities where we're supposed to be doing research for the people, and distorts everything. And the objective of Urban Futures, with especially a Marxist historian running Wits named Colin Bundy, it was to provide some vision of reform which corresponded to Igoli 2002, the big urban management plan to bring in Suez. That was a big company. I'm sure you know so well, Bricks, because of you fighting Suez, the Suez Linhas de Zo in the streets. And we should add that there were fantastic allies from places like Cochabamba, Bolivia, along with Joburg, the second big site in the whole world for 21st century water wars, and Canada, the Council of Canadians. But the basic point to conclude is that really taught us when, especially Ahmed Prashani came to, a petty bourgeois academic like me and said, no, it's time for you to choose sides. Are you with the reformers who want to squeeze in Igoli 2002 privatization through some talk left where you end up walking right? Or will you join us? And in fact, we did in the very final session have a big breakout of the academics in Municipal Services Project, because the activists put us on the spot. And because, as I say, they were teaching us that when you get free basic water delivered on a silver platter from, even at that point it was Ronnie Casseroles, you better look at the activists to see if it's happening, because it actually wasn't. And it was part and parcel of their gimmicks that Mike Muller especially was arranging to not properly price water for us. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Patrick, for that. I just wanted to add one thing that happened at that Wits City Futures Conference, is that after we threw the water bombs and just completely disrupted, we then went and ate every single bit of the last bit of food for all of the delegates. So we invaded the dining hall and took and reappropriated the food. And all of the academics were very angry, and all of the invited guests, because they had no lunch. But the comrades, about 300 or 400, were very full after that, which was very nice. It was just an act of resistance and other things that was a important symbolic gesture. Other comrades. Welcome, by the way. I see Comrade Rob and Comrade Claire have walked in the room. Also, right from the beginning of the APF, they were there. So welcome to both of you. Yes, you're going to, there's a comment or a question online.
Yes, I just want to read something out. It's from a comrade named Virgie. It's Virgie here. I just want to say that the APF became a platform where we learned serious politics, organizing, and taking action. Also, how the APF initiated the social movement in Daba.
Yeah, we'll get to the SMI, which was a byproduct of some of the work of the APF. But let's get any more reflections on these are the early years. So anything, as Ahmed said, from that sort of mid to late 1990s period, all the way to the sort of early 2000s. That's the period we're sort of looking at. Yeah, okay. Kaiser, did you want to say something? Okay, I'll come to you, Ahmed.
Good afternoon once again. My name is Jaser from Orange Farm. Yeah, I just want to say something like that was actually for us because some of us were not even, involved in the politics. So we learned a lot, as members of Orange Farm Water Crisis Committee being affiliated under APF. So it was also during that time of WSSD. I still remember like one of the topics for the workshops that we had, it was actually the question was whether under neoliberalism, under globalization, for example, can people have, better life as ANC once promised? Yeah, so those that platform actually gave us, an opportunity to solve that dilemma, if I may put it in that way. Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry, I don't want to but there's, I mean, this is important. Thanks, Comrade, for also reminding me about this. One of the okay, so partly the context here is also important because in 1999 there was the WTO meeting in Seattle. And there was also another thing that happened in Washington. I think that to Travis go to Washington was a kind of, so there was this kind of alter globalization movement activism that had often targeted conferences as part of its activism. And that was partly what reinforced the strategy of targeting urban futures, right? But then that also became an important point of national mobilization for the APF, and that allowed us to kind of gather a more national platform. First with I think it was 2001, was the Durban Social Forum's formation at the WCA, World Conference Against Racism. And the APF, and this was also a little bit of a kind of con move that we pulled. We got, we went to, Pashani worked at Heidi Ball Foundation. So we went to Heidi Ball Foundation and we asked them to, and we, myself, Nicholas, a couple of us were on the Freedom of Expression Institute executive. So we put in a proposal to Heidi Ball Foundation with Pashani there to give us money for a train, a freedom of expression train. And Monley was supposed to like do workshops on the train. I don't think the workshops actually happened because comrades were like, we don't want to train together, so on. And I think that's also where I met Bricks for the first time. I mean, Prashani knew Bricks through working for Kanya, and Kanya had been doing projects in Orange Farm. But that march was quite important, the Double Social Forum March. There was with these national mobilizations, there were often antagonisms amongst, people within there. And that's, at that march, at the end of the march, there were these contradictions that kind of played out, but there was also a desire from like some of the key left comrades, myself, and like the kids from what's this from like that were part of the Durban Social, well, they were part of the CCF, the Concerned Citizens Forum. And we then started like pushing the cops and like trying to break into the convention center. And the night before, Ellen had been made the chief marshal. And that actually then, Ellen came between us and the cops. And at some point, he picked up Daniel Hutchinson. Daniel was tiny, Ellen's quite massive. And yeah, it landed up in a fist fight. And with Ellen, you know what I mean, getting knocked down. And then afterwards, I remember there was a whole kind of disciplinary action they were trying against Daniel, whether he was going to get expelled for all of this. And it was like I'm incomplete, but like I mean, there was a lot of tension also at that time between the so-called autonomists and the Trotskyists in the organization, and it became like kind of it extended to the point where at some point John Appolis became hey, Ellen, John Appolis became considered part of the autonomous faction, which was I found funny. Nonetheless, the big mobilization, though, that where these contradictions between the NGO sector and the social movements come to a head is the next year at the WSSD. So there's this another big conference. It's now in Johannesburg. There was initially a broad kind of, Kanya was one of the people that was organizing. And Eddie Cottle, by that time, was in, what was it, Land Organization? No, not LPM. It was no, that was on D-Land, and there was something else, but I can't remember what it was, right? But Eddie was kind of one of the people at the front of that was part of the NGOs that had kind of constituted this forum that the APF was also part of. We were a little bit more ambivalent about participating in that that NGO kind of thing, but then that splits. With like the AIDC folk going, you know what I mean, with the Kusatu contingent, and it looked like, you know what I mean, we were done for. You know what I mean? Our plans of having this march and so forth looked like they weren't going to happen because of how this thing had unfolded. And to the credit of the APF, probably the hardest we worked in organizing, I think, in our history was for the WSSD 2002 march, where we ended up dwarfing the official march. And that was a very important moment also nationally, where there was a kind of sense that the kind of center of gravity and point of energy was shifting now, to political energy was shifting now to the social movement. So yeah, just wanted to do that.
Yeah, there's another one from online.
So Comrade Virgie says it's the National Land Committee. And Comrade Nick says early on in 2003, the APF was the center of mobilization against the war in Iraq. The APF was the center of left politics in Joburg, and we believed we could take everything on.
Yes, that important. The anti-war coalition, which the one thing I wanted to just surface, and maybe other comrades, is this note, because to me this was fun. Myself personally, I was the chairperson of the Joburg district of the Communist Party. I was on the PEC of the Communist Party at that time with Amos Mus and all of these others, people who then, and of course, I eventually get expelled a couple years later from the Communist Party for trying to be a communist. Yeah, so, but what I wanted to say was the APF sort of encapsulated that early transitional break within the progressive forces of South Africa. We attempted to try to do what all good lefties would do, bring a whole range of different working class forces together, try to bring them together in a organizational form. And it failed precisely because as the struggles in the communities and the students and the Wits began to take center stage, this went directly against the ANC and the Communist Party and COSATU's move towards more neoliberal, more privatized, more corporatized politics. And they left the APF. Very, very nasty. Not only did they leave, they attacked us. COSATU kicked us out of their building, evicted us from their building, and said we don't have anything to do. They called us counter-revolutionaries. They called us ultra-leftists, all sorts of nasty names. And as a result of that split, everything that happened after that in terms of from the left side was framed by this here's the alliance on one side, here's the independent left, here's this, and I think that's important to note that in some ways the APF encapsulated these politics, and the last 25 years has been a playing out of those politics in many ways. Yeah, I just wanted to put that. I mean, we can analyze that in some ways, but I'm inviting other contributions, other reflections. You don't have to have some major political and ideological point to make. Maybe it's a personal reflection. Maybe it's something you remember about that time period. You were thinner. Yes, we were younger and thinner. Yeah, with less hair. Yes. Others? John, do you want to come in? Claire, you want to come? No? Anyone else? We'll have plenty of chance to talk as we move through. Any other reflections on these early years? Okay. All right. Then what I'm going to ask is, John, I'm going to ask you to come in and take us, because Ahmed's already introduced some of those big events, 2002, the WSSD, World Conference, and that was sort of like a couple years into the APF's existence where we were beginning to have impact. There was a feeling that the social movements, remember there was the Landless People's Movement, there was Jubilee, there was the anti-eviction campaign in the Western Cape. All these social movements were gathering steam, and there was a lot of debate about, well, this is the real alternative, this is where we're going. There's a feeling of confidence, of really being able to take on not only the state, but corporate capital as well, and really forge an alternative. How did that play in some ways, and as you start reflecting as we move into those next years, give us some framing on that, and then we'll discuss that period.
Okay. Thank you, Komide. Yeah, I think maybe just to add to some of the processes of the early formation of the APF, which will also assist in understanding the evolution of the organization. I think as comrades were saying earlier on, I mean, there were the anti-Goli 2002 struggles, which mainly involved the unions and other organizations, and then the struggle against the Wits restructuring at the Wits University, which involved SASCO and the students. But at the same time, as comrades were outlining earlier on, communities were also now starting to resist the consequences of neoliberalism, especially around 1999 and 2000. Because if comrades remember that the ANC adopted GEAR around about 1996. So 4 years later, I think the communities were starting to feel the impact and the consequences of neoliberalism. And many communities started to resist these measurements of neoliberalism. So when the APF was formed through that process of resisting the Urban Futures Conference, which brought together anti-Goli, the Wits Crisis Committee to fight the Urban Futures Conference, then after that process, the APF really was a forum of activists. Activists from all these different organizations. But it also then attracted, the SACC was part of the APF in its early days, Katoros concerned residents, that is the Katleong, Vosloorus, Tukosa area. It attracted all other kind of community organizations. So the APF then at one point had 34 community organizations part of the formation. I mean, spread across the different townships in Gauteng. So one of the first things we had to then deal with, because of this growth of the APF, was to look at how do we now reorganize internally the APF from a forum of activists to a forum that will allow the community organizations and community activists to not only influence the APF but also drive and control the process of the APF, because they are now constituting the major forces within the APF. So that created a lot of debate about how to reorganize the APF. The question of should the APF have regions, Johannesburg region, Vaal region, those kind of things. And then eventually we settled on a structure that looked like a union structure almost, or we appropriated some of the union concepts like office bearers. We elected office bearers. We had the different committees. We had coordinating committee. We had the executive committee. So we appropriated and used some of the kind of the categories of structures that existed, or from where many of us were coming from at that point in time. I don't think we ever kind of dealt with extensively with looking at other movements who were also now kind of emerging, how they kind of internally form themselves. I think we were just relying on existing examples of previous struggles, etc. But the APF had to now deal with its own kind of internal development and its own internal growth. Then I think because of all the different struggles that were emerging, we then also had to deal with the World Summit for Sustainable Development, the WSSD. I think there were a lot of processes that were centered around how do we understand this summit in relation to globalization, in relation to new liberalism, and the role of the ANC as the agent of new liberalism in South Africa. And I think that's the kind of cause people to take a position in relation to how they relate to the World Summits. There were those who were arguing for participation in the processes of the summit, and there were those who were arguing to set up an alternative process. Now, in that NGO forum that was set up there, that's where some of the key debates were already emerging. And as Ahmed was indicating, some of the comrades were articulating for closer cooperation with COSATU, with ANC. The others, like Kenya College, were leading the fight in that NGO forum, were arguing no, that you cannot form an alliance with the people who are the drivers of new liberalism within the country. And I think that then led to the split. But that split was important because that split attracted the international movements who were here, and they were then, the international movements also had to take a stance of whether they are going with the ANC, COSATU aligned processes, or they are going with the movements, the social movements position that was anti-new liberal and anti the ANC was the key political agent of new liberalism. And I think we then constituted, first of all, I think it was the Social Movement United, the SMU, as a way of bringing together all the movements that were clearly taking a clear stance against new liberalism, and also the international movements like Via Campesina, MST, all those movements were here in South Africa at that time, and they linked up with the SMU, and then we organized the march in from Alex to Sandton. If Comrade Trevor remember, we went to the police, Metro Police, because we had to get permission for that march. And there were two marches planned for that day. There was a march organized by the ANC Alliance, and there was a march organized by the social movements, the Anti-Privatisation Forum. So what the police did in that meeting is to bring all the parties together. They brought Kusatu, they brought the ANC, they brought us, the APF, etc. So the police were trying to play a political role by saying there must be only one march, and we must all march together from from Alex to Sandton. So they had a clear political agenda there, and we kind of resisted that. They then tried to compromise, said, okay, you all be together at the starting point, but I think they say we can move first, and then an hour later, the Lions will move afterwards. You know what I mean? So we just rejected. And so those were the kind of, even right through into the state, there was attempts to try to fudge the political lines of demarcation. And I think, I mean, the march was probably the high point of the anti-privatization forum in many of the social movements, because that march, I think there were about 30,000 people in that march from Alex to Sandton. So, and I think there were many other kinds of issues that the EPF played a major role in. It really had the potential to be, I mean, to become an alternative movement. I mean, comrades were mentioning the question of the war in Iraq. There again, we took a position of not aligning with the ANC and CUSATU and Communist Party. We had our own anti-war coalition. CUSATU them had. So the issue of CUSATU and the attitude to the ANC was a constant issue that emerged within the life of the APF, and how to relate to those particular forces. Even on the question of the national elections, how should the EPF approach the question of the national elections? Should it boycott? Should it engage in a protest vote? Or should it give a critical vote for the ANC? So those were very important kind of political engagements and debates. There were debates about socialism, whether the APF must adopt socialism. There were debates about whether the APF must support the formation of a political party. So there were many of these kinds of political debates in the APF. I think the major challenge that I think we confronted was, and which I think as a movement we never really got to develop an appropriate sort of strategy, was to work out an organizing strategy to deal with conditions of neoliberalism, because the social base of the APF was largely unemployed. With the exit of CUSATU and the unions and all of that, the community organizations that constituted the APF were largely the young people, pensioners, and unemployed. And clearly, with the constant onslaught from the state and from the bosses, how to organize a movement under conditions of neoliberalism. I think that was one of the things we grappled with. We, at one point, because of the breakdown of social solidarities, social support institutions in the communities, because of the levels of poverty and unemployment, and how to sustain a movement of the unemployed, how to sustain activists that are unemployed, was some of the important sort of strategic challenges that we had to engage with. I think at one point we then agreed to form a project committee, to deal with projects in the townships. And I think Phineas Malapela was the coordinator of the projects committee, because it was part of our kind of thinking of maybe in the townships we need to do these kinds of projects, mutual aid projects, food gardenings, all those kinds of things, and other kind of projects that will assist organizations to sustain themselves and even the unemployed. But we never got to that particular stage. I think the second kind of strategic challenge was the new terrain, the new political terrain. We were just moving from a terrain of apartheid and now to a terrain of bourgeois parliamentary politics, where now you had a state that is a black state, a black government that was elected by a black majority, and there was also the question of electoral politics, how to build a movement under these new conditions. I think we never got around to really deal with that issue, because that issue was kind of more anchored through the question whether we must participate in local government election or whether we must participate in national election. But I mean, that parliamentary process terrain is a much more broader terrain than just elections. And we never could find a common, even tactical approach to the question of election. And it always created very deep tensions within the movement, within the APF, whenever we get to the stage of either local government elections or national elections. So I think those were, and I think it's still some of the key issues even today. I think that movements are confronted with. So, and for me, those are sort of important points, because if you have an activist layer that is unemployed, clearly the conditions of developing and creating an activist layer that is that can anchor and sustain the organizations through different periods becomes an important element. It's different from the 70s and the 80s, where most of the activists, they were either workers, they were permanent workers, people who were employed, they could rely on their own resources to sustain themselves. They could buy books, they could do kind of different things. They could travel, move to different meetings. And so in that way, the activists would develop and form their consciousness. But with the unemployed layer, how do you do that? And how do you sustain an organization? Because clearly the working class are not always in a state of struggle. Sometimes movements go up and sometimes movements go down because of the ebbs and flows of struggles. But when you have those ebbs and flows, it's the activist layer that sustain, it's the cadre layer that in the normal terms, it's the cadre layer that sustain and keep those organizations alive and carry the baton to the next phase of struggle. The last point I think which is important, which comrades have also raised, is that we were confronted with the challenge of building a new movement when the old movement was not assisting that process at all. Kusatu, Sanko, and all those formations. There was no kind of continuity between that generation, that movement that fought apartheid, and this new generation that were coming. So the question of certain of the progressive traditions and principles of movement building, of organizational building, of leadership, were not carried through to the new movements, to the social movements. There were no carrying over of the baton, as people would call it. So we had to construct a new movement almost from scratch, and most times in opposition to the old movement that were fighting against apartheid. Yeah, maybe I would stop there. Thank you.
Okay, John has raised a range of different things about those years going into the sort of middle section of the APF's existence. And there are. Yeah, I was. By the way, this publication here, which if comrades who didn't remember or didn't know, this is called Transitions Child, Anti-Private, and this was basically done back in Ahmed, myself in particular. Prashani also helped out, and a few other comrades. All of the main leaders of the APF were interviewed. All of the main activists of the APF were interviewed. I think there were 40-something interviews that were done, all captured, all digitalized, all archived. It's all there for people. And these were some excerpts. And then I wrote a sort of basic history of the APF to sort of frame it. We also had Ahmed, this shows you the time frames that we were operating in. Yes, and a CD. At the time, with all of this stuff on the CD. Yeah, with all of these things on the CD that you could then look at on your computer and stuff like that. Anyway, and these are all available through the South African History Archive, by the way, for anybody to access. It's all now digitalized. And it gives a really in-depth picture because you can see the debates. You can see the different, they come out in the interviews, they come out in many of the reflections. Some people, after the fact. So it's a really good resource. Just wanted to mention that. I'm going to open it up, comrades. Again, any reflections, any comments, any things? Yes, Comrade Trevor. And then we'll come back to Lawrence.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having this thing, comrades, and also in memory of Comrade Prishani, who was an amazing comrade. Yeah, I think, with all the reflections, I'll just cut to the chase, Yeah, so on the question of debates, so at first, I'm just talking about internal political life of APF. At first, the APF was a vibrant forum for debate. I think we would debate sometimes the whole weekend, one issue, which seemed crazy to me, actually, but it happened, And then you remember lots of translation, lots of desire to get everyone to participate so that it's not just the, traditional intellectuals. And then also very democratic from that point of view, because when we're going to, let's say, take an action or even, compose a campaign, there'll be thorough debate before we took the position. Of course, debate is about agreeing and disagreeing. It's about your position winning or losing. It's about those who win the debate on that point. Their line of action is what the organization must follow. Yeah. So over time, so there was, let's say, a negative political method. Yeah. Whereby, so in anticipation of a debate, there is an organization of what I can call majorities. So before you come to the debate, you've already organized your majority to win it. So the debate will still continue, but in a way it's pointless because the majority is set up. Yeah. So it's almost like a throwback to, Joseph Stalin and all the Marxist sectarian politics in history, the West. Yeah. So I think that's where we failed. Yeah. I don't think we failed because we adopted an incorrect line at that time. So, for example, the debate about socialism, I can't remember whether the side which said APF must adopt socialism won or not. I can't remember. You can remind me. We didn't, yeah. So the comrades who said, no, we must not adopt socialism as our vision, won the debate. Can you see? I even forget, because although maybe it's important to comrades, but that was not really the issue, when I reflect now. As I didn't know, Dale said 15 years later. Yeah, which is amazing. Yeah. So I think, of course, there were things like, do we support this strike? Some saying, no, let's not support the strike. Others saying, let's support the strike. And some of the issues which Comrade John has raised, yeah. But I think where we fell short, and I'm sorry if it might appear as, self-absolution after the fact, but certainly, at that time, I was opposed, and I saw this organizing of majorities, and it actually made the organization weak. Yeah. On other issues, we can debate. I got many points, but, let's allow it to flow. But I thought on that one, I should just mention that. Okay, I know it might provoke some people, but let's just, it's 15 years later, man. Yeah.
Lawrence, did you wanted to? And comrades, what the reason why we try to do a circle is so that we didn't have a situation where, and if so, comrades can, because otherwise people can't see you back here. Hold on a second. Go ahead.
Thank you, facilitate the chairperson of the session. I think one thing that is key, of which maybe we must understand, is that I think other speakers, they've highlighted this. APF brought together diverse group from various political background, united against neoliberalism, against privatization. I think that was the foundation of APF. It was the basis of APF, on which it was the foundation on which APF was built. In other words, it was a united front. In the united front, it's possible that, as the speaker was saying, to disagree on other issues, maybe the question of the state or the question of parliamentary election, etc., because you are not from the same political background. It must not, I don't think it was necessarily a weakness. However, on what brought people together, like neoliberalism, APF activists, they were moving in the same direction. I think APF produced great fighters in fighting privatization, in township, fighting against eviction. I think that was a strength of APF. In terms of whether we fight neoliberalism, there was always an ideological homogeneity. Maybe one might not find ideological homogeneity when it comes to the state and other key theoretical questions, but not neoliberalism. I think they were united. That was highlighting that APF, its goal at that time was to fight privatization, of which I think there were many victories that were secured by APF over the years. Like they stopped evictions, and there are other things that they've won over the years in the struggle against privatization. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, comrade. It's Alan's my name. I was a part of the APF development. I appreciate, and it is important to pay homage to Comrade Pashani. It is also important to pay homage to so many comrades that have passed. Comrade Arthur from KCR. Claire was on the phone when he was assassinated and heard the gunshot. Bongani passed away. So many activists from the APF, and that really hurt in those times. I just want to get back to Trevor's discussion And for me, near the end, I withdrew from it because I was supporting that APF should stand in elections alongside Trevor's efforts in Operation Kanyisa movement. And at the last moment, I pulled out of that. And that was, for me, there was a very acrimonious debate, and that you saw the majorities. You had Celio, Nelly which later went into parliament, local government here with Malema's crowd, frothing at the mouth of how anyone who went into elections is going to be corrupted and become rubbish. Okay, but it was very acrimonious debate. Should the APF take on the Operation Kanyisa movement for all its branches? And I think that was a bit of a mistake. It should have been from people like my side or Trevor. Should the AP support those who want to stand in elections? But actually, that was for me that ending moment where the APF actually went down and ended up as a squabbling mass at Kanya College, with one group with knob carries wanting to hit the other ones with knob carries, and where money and the allowances and all of that started to corrupt activists. The cases where the comrades were accused of rape on an APF mission, all of that started to turn in. But also, I think we had to realize that ANC was also trying to bring in some reforms. Some of our branches were going back to the ANC, all right, where the ANC could offer them something. We could offer nothing other than fighting. And that was a case of you have to be careful in movements when your government starts to offer reforms, throw out some crumbs to the people to split the movement, to pull it back into its hold. Thank you.
Kaiser, oh, sorry. Ahmed Kaiser.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, for me, like as Comrade John was talking about, that construction of the APF, for me, what comes is also through the conscientization that came, like when we learned about, some topics around gender relations and so on, because it was at that time also we had Remoho as a women component. So that is one thing, like as I was saying, that it was more that conscientizing. And then also because some of the things, like we're doing things from maybe being informed by patriarchy. So there was also that gradual movement, towards actually improving the relations between genders. Thank you.
So this is probably like the hardest set of interventions for me to kind of think through. Partly because I don't, unlike Ellen, I don't have I have a kind of clear account of our decline. I think there were a lot of different things that were going on. But before I get to that, I do want to just say, because I do think it's important. There were three positions in the socialism debate, and John can correct me if I'm wrong. It's just important to remember this. There was the kind of position that comrades that I was associated with kind of embraced, which was uh, um, on the socialism. It was that that from my perspective, it was that a state-driven transition to an egalitarian society held its own dangers, and I didn't want to embrace that idea of socialism if that meant a state-driven transition, state-centered transition. There was the SG keep left position, which was socialism has to be what we embrace. And then there was probably the position that I think worn out which was the John Adair position, which was that if the idea of socialism didn't emerge out of the grassroots of the movements themselves through their engagement with these ideas, then it was just going to be a kind of statement of socialism for its own sake, rather than actually reflecting where the movement was and the level of ideological development in the movement. Right, John, that was more or less your guys' position, right? And I think that's the position. And on the elections, again, I mean, our positions went a little bit. There was at some point because we couldn't come to an agreement, we will not vote for the bourgeois parties, I think was the leaving unclear who the bourgeois parties were at the time and so on. But that also, I think that position was adopted almost to kind of create space for the OKM and people who wanted to contest to go forward without it kind of causing a split in the organization. I don't actually remember that, though. I mean, I thought that was a healthy set of debates. I don't remember that's where things got all fucked up. I do think that increasingly there was a lot of kind of factionalism. I'm sort of like not completely convinced by Trevor that if we caucus about something before a meeting, you know what I mean, it's kind of foreclosing the debate. The debate doesn't only start in the meeting. People can organize around a particular position and so on. So that organized majorities and so on. Where that became a problem was rather in the contests for where we weren't debating ideas and so on, but we were contesting the control over the organization. And there was, if I remember, there was this kind of idea that given Tebogo Trevor's kind of position in the office, that the SG had a disproportionate amount of power within the organization. And amongst different communities, there was a kind of often the idea that some affiliates had better access to the resources of the organization and so on. What happens in how that fight played out, for me, is where, you know what I mean, the kind of beginning of the end. And I do think so I would have been more, because of my autonomous identity, I was more inclined to the kind of faction that our chairperson here, Comrade John, was associated with Dale and so on. But in how that fight played out, and I think there was a kind of alliances made that actually already poisoned certain things. You know what I mean? Is that in pushing the SG out, if you will. I don't think that's exactly what, pushing out is a strong word. But our alliances were made with some very dodgy characters, in my opinion. And I thought that was more of a kind of power squabble and one that was actually grounded in a common set of politics. And I do think that's where, and I'm not kind of blaming this particular faction sitting on the side, because I think the kind of evil factionalism happened on both sides, and people were really started getting quite nasty to each other. I mean, we weren't just debating, but you know what I mean? There was strong antagonisms in which people would I remember some of the things Trevor said in meetings, and I'm still a little bit sore about them. And I'm sure it goes the other way. I'm not picking you out or anything. I'm just saying, you know what I mean? I think that there was that on both sides, there was a lot of antagonism that wasn't based on a political platform. That did seem it was more about the control of the organization. Now, people might believe that is slightly simplistic, But I will say that for just like Ellen, that factionalism that rooted within the organization made it a little bit harder to want to be in the organization. You know what I mean? Where you had to choose. Like, I mean, for instance, you know what I mean? I had like tremendous respect for Trevor. You know, and so the whole way this thing kind of played out, it did mean that you had to like kind of choose a particular side within that in those factions. And I think that was, for me, the beginning of the end. Oh, and also the prepaid water meter struggle was also another very important one. I think we almost lost on the ground of Soweto at some point, you know, because what happened was we go into Piri, and that's where the first kind of phase kind of thing, and all the attention is around the Piri stuff. Then with the court case, there's almost this kind of juridicization of the political argument. So our demands start to reflect the demands that we take into the court. You know what I mean? And also our conduct on the ground is meant to reflect that other strategy, whereas that was always like a secondary strategy to the mayor's-based politics that we were trying to build. But also there, we got smashed. Like, as we move beyond Piri, you know what I mean? The struggle in Soweto takes on like quite violent forms as a consequence of the repression that we faced. And I mean, we sort of lucked out with the first court case, the first kind of victory. You know what I mean? But the first round. So by the time when we come to the court, although we win certain things, you know what I mean? By then, the mass movement had been eroded, both by our own factionalism inside and the way that the movement had been smashed on the streets of Soweto. Sorry.
Okay, Claire, I just wanted to before you come in here, is just to fill in a few of these gaps, because I don't think that we're going to get the full picture if we simply concentrate on some of the internal battles that were going on in the ANC, in the APF, which there were. But I was just rereading the brief history, and it's important to note that during that period from 2004 to 2008 in particular, that period there where a lot of these things were happening, the APF did incredible things, incredible amounts of work. I can list about 10 things here, including a whole range of other things, including the Coalition on Water Privatization, including anti-eviction struggles, including issues around the HIV/AIDS research, including practical solidarities on the ground in terms of workers. APF drove a lot of things. We had, by 2007, we had more affiliates than we had ever, 39 affiliates. So there is a dual, I just want to say there's a parallel process going on. One is things are happening inside, and a lot of the key activists are fighting each other. But outside, there's also a lot of other things that APF was involved in and, in fact, expanded. We went to Queenstown. We went to Eastern Cape, in Northwest. All through those years, there was things going on in about 5 different provinces. It wasn't just Gauteng. And yes, the contradictions were there, but there was a huge amount of, and people looked to the APF, irrespective of all the problems. They looked to the APF for inspiration, for guidance, for a whole range of things. And I think sometimes we tend to, understandably, get caught up almost in our own sort of internecine battles that were happening there inside. But outside there, even though they did impact some of those things, there was a lot of good work that was being done and a lot of good mobilization, which I just didn't want that to get lost in the conversation. That's all. Thanks. Claire?
Thanks, Dale. I could have saved you that, because that was my first point. Okay. Firstly, I think, can we just be cautious about looking for a moment when things started going down? Because, so my first point is, like, firstly, to look for a moment and to not be looking at an interaction of also how us turning inwards and starting to fight with ourselves also reflected something about the circumstances we were in, not just, although it was for sure real, that we were faced with a whole set of strategic questions that actually were caught in a conundrum. And the first conundrum was that as we began more and more to see, or as many of us, as this comrade has been saying, began to see a kind of deeper into the need for a strategy that goes beyond reform. In those same, and I'm tempted to use the word moment, in those same moments, we are also facing how small we still remain compared to the weight of the movement that would be needed to actually shift the direction, the weight of neoliberalism and of the beginnings of a turn to the not even the beginnings, let me say rather the further development of the state's turn towards repression. You know, and I think that's, and that's not just a matter of ourselves, although there were important decisions that we made that I think arenas that we didn't contest, our repeated failure to contest COSATU's constituency, that did then leave us, you know, like groping for money and always dependent on some NGO funding or something. Like, sure, I think all of those things for sure do affect us. The decisions we made were kind of important, but also I think we've got to also ask ourselves, what were we actually expecting, and how, you know, to not just to think about what we did achieve under the circumstances, but also to think how far could we have gone beyond that without having broken out of our beginnings as the very real first break in the monolith, without a doubt. That became a mini mass movement very quickly, but we weren't able to get beyond that question of how we went from being a mini mass movement to a mass movement. Okay, and I think that was indeed our own strategy was part of it, but also a question of were circumstances ready, if you see what I mean, to be able to make that next leap? Or do we have to also accept part of the story of the APF is that it was an advance guard of people starting to make the break. And the fact that we made the break somewhat ahead of the kind of breaks that kind of came in a more mass way, you know, around the time, not only around Marikana, but that was starting to build up to that being a bigger break, right? So I'm also thinking, I'm trying to say, as important and as acrimonious and all of that those debates were, you know, I think looking back with the distance, we've also got to understand that our circumstances perhaps were in themselves a limit, that the molecular change, if you like, amongst people and how people were relating to and thinking about the ANC, just hadn't gone far enough and wide enough yet for us to really break out of our smallness, especially without a strategy of how to relate to what we can also now see looking back, and to some extent we could see looking forward, that movements like COSATU that were now declining mass movements, right? Which again, you know, part of me makes me sad that we weren't more entrenched in that in order to influence it, not entrenched in it, sorry, in order to influence it more as a, you know, in walking that line between being a group that was breaking with the previous thing, but struggling to find a way of continuing to relate to those people who still wanted to resist something of what was going on, but hadn't seen the need to break. Yeah. So and then did Keep Left argue for APF to be socialist? I thought we were arguing that it needed to remain an umbrella organization and not be turned into a socialist party. So maybe other comms can correct me. My memory is not great.
Yeah, yeah. Taz, can we just check to see? Okay, so just it's a logistical thing. The comrades from SWAP have graciously agreed. We were initially just going to say coffee and some cakes here at the Forge, which you're, by the way, anybody wants a coffee, anybody wants a cake, go get it. It's on the house. Okay? It's on us here. But comrades from SWAP have gone to get some lunch, some food. And I think that's coming shortly. So what we wanted to try to do, it's now 10 minutes to 2. How many people do we have online? Was there anyone online? I just don't want to leave anybody. Was there some comments? There is a short comment? Sorry, I just didn't want to leave out the comrades. We had several comrades online, I think up to 8 or 9 comrades online. Can you see that, Simon? Sorry, just read it out.
I think that so the comment is, I think it is important to draw from the lessons learned and the challenges that we previously encountered.
Okay, indeed. So while we're waiting for that lunch, and then we'll take a break, I'll also, other comrades' reflections? Yeah, okay. I was waiting for you to give your perspective.
Hello, comrades. It's great to be with you once again after so much long time. APF, I started joining APF, I think, in 2005-06. And I was recruited by Comrade Torong, the late Comrade Torong. And I was part of the EWCCC. And I felt like APF was a safe space to talk about your social problems. We had great moments in APF. We still remember those great moments. We grew in APF. Some of us went to school. Some of us we were very conscious. We learned throughout APF. So APF, although we had squabbles, although we were not agreeing on so many issues, but we were together in APF. And I appreciate the time we had in APF. It was a great time. That was my reflection. Thank you.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, because sometimes when we're doing these remembering things, sometimes when we tend to sort of, remember, we obviously remember particular things, the more traumatic things and the more things that are there. And I wanted to say, as someone who was involved in trying to deal with one of the most contentious aspects of any organization, which is finances and resources. It is a job that nobody should want, I can tell you, because you get hit from every single side. This is, and everything, and whatever the case might be. But that aside, I think what I, in reflecting and remembering, I mean, when I was looking back and I was reading back through the history, and I think, we could surface all these debates and all these different things and whatever not. But the very fact that we're in the same room here, the very fact that I'm not enemies with comrades in fact, they're my comrades. We might disagree, we might have debates, but we're still in movements together. We're still struggling together in different ways. And one thing I want to say, which I'll do in the last section when we talk about the advances and the setbacks and the implosion, so I don't want to get there yet. But the one thing I wanted to say about these other years, these middle years in particular, was that I think that we underestimated, and it was understandable at the time, because we were quite taken by all the trying to keep the movement alive, trying to keep things moving and everything else. The extent to which the APF was a pull for many, many comrades in the country. Because it was, by 2007, 2008 in particular, by about that period there, if you remember, the landless people's movement was sort of falling apart. Jubilee had split completely and almost fall apart. The anti-eviction campaign was pretty much falling apart. And it was happening across the board. So APF was in a milieu of social movements that had risen and come back down. I think we can reflect on some of those larger questions outside the APF in terms of, I think the point that Claire's making is very important, is the context with which you're in. The other thing I want to mention was Zuma. Zuma. This had a huge impact. And we haven't realized this, because when Polokwane happened and when that whole thing there and Zuma came in, a lot of people within the APF, and a lot of them pivoted towards Zuma. They were like, now we've got someone within the, and because he had been backed by the Communist Party, because he had been backed by Cosatu, and this was presented as a left turn, and with the people, it had a huge impact. Remember, John, there were comrades there, and so I think I just wanted to mention that because I think that important point that Claire makes about the context, and we're there, we were always being attacked. The fact that we uncovered in 2008 4 paid informers of the NIA within the APF, 4 of the National Intelligence Agency. We uncovered them. There were people that were working inside, that were constantly feeding information, that were constantly trying. There were agents provocateurs that were there simply to divide us, that would come to meetings and do nothing but just make people hate each other. That's all they did. They never had anything constructive to say. They never had anything to offer. And when tasks were given, they were nowhere to be found. But they always had something to say about being a maximalist position, taking maximalist positions. And if you didn't, you were not here. And yeah, so those kinds of things, I think we just, to say that there was things that were beyond our control and we tried in a lot of ways, but it was difficult. Comrade Alan mentioned people who died. There were people, remember the comrade, who was the comrade who got hung from a tree in the Vol? Who was that comrade? Who was trying to, there were comrades who fell along the way all the time. And I'm going to talk about those last sections about what I think triggered a lot of the eventual implosion of the movement that was accumulated, but there were certain things. I'm not going to get there yet, but let me ask if there's any other reflections of those years where the APF was growing, by the way. It wasn't shrinking, it was growing. That was the irony. And having all these big internal things, comrades were moving back and forth. We had new affiliates, some of the older ones were shifting. There was a lot of stuff going on. Any other reflections? Okay, I've got, Patrick, I'll come to you just now. Trevor.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry you're traumatized. I thought it was debate. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, yeah, no, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a joke now, but at that time, we were facing, like, I think Comrade Claire's got it. We were facing some heavy questions and challenges. But like she puts it, we're not yet strong enough, developed as a full-blown mass movement to challenge the enemies we had defined and to respond adequately to the hopes which some communities or people or on the left thought we could achieve. Yeah. So but then that begs another question, because she says some of the positions we adopted did not help us, do our best given the challenge of being too small to effect the big dream we had. Yeah. Too small to slay Goliath. Okay? Yeah. So I think maybe one day, if someone writes a book, certainly from this side, we would write down every decision, can you see? Which I think if we were to join the dots, we would see that maybe we could have gone a different path. Yeah. Maybe we could have done much better. For example, there was a strike. Now we're debating, should we support the strike? I mean, to me, it just doesn't make sense, because I just assume we have to support strikes, Yeah. Also, this thing of we were too small. At every point, I thought it's almost, a given thing that we're looking to grow, looking to the millions. But I think certain positions were self-isolating. Can you see? Yeah. For example, I don't know, I think it's the late Comrade Opa, God bless his soul, who was writing things about Cosatu being part of the bourgeois state. So those positions, it sounds all theoretical on paper, but it wasn't helping us to do what Comrade Claire was saying, to try and win those who were not happy with what the ANC was doing, but had not yet broken politically from the ANC the way we had. Okay? So there are those positions, which actually was blocking us or stopping us. At the same time, of course, I agree with Dale fully. On the side of COSATU, they were just impossible. They were like clinging to the ANC with, I don't know what was going on. The ANC is busy with gear, they just cling there. But on our side, I think maybe we're becoming the center of our own political universe. And I think the march, which Comrade John is talking about, the 30,000, yes, it was good and it felt good. We're there with John on stage and talking nonsense there, with, who's that guy? Pahad. Yeah, remember Aziz's brother. I think they're both late, or Aziz still alive. They're both late, yeah. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so it was good. But now John says it put the APF on the map. Yeah. Yes, but which map? So we are supposed to use that position to reach out even harder to those masses still looking to COSATU. Can you see? Yeah, but we started to think that, maybe we're strong enough to face Goliath. I'm just saying those little moments. Yeah. Yeah, but I do agree, and I think it was a moment, at least at first, of the unity of trade unions, communities, students. And that was what was best about it when it started. I agree with Lawrence. Later, it was good because different political tendencies, ideologies were together. Can you see? Yeah, we could. But basically, the real highlight was when we had SAMU, IMATU, SASCO, NEHAU, TCC, Katoras, all united fighting against neoliberalism. Of course, the enemy was not going to sit back and allow that to develop. That's why infiltrators, Thabo Mbeki, in his weekly thing wrote, those guys are counter-revolutionary. I remember clearly Vusi Mavimbela, the head of the NIA, coming to our offices, long meeting. I think it was also partly intimidation. So I accept that. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I'll pick up from there because some of you would remember one of the transmission belts of radicalism from past generations, from the international. Dennis Brutus. Is that a name that warms your heart as it does mine? And Dennis was actually in those same targets of President Mbeki, along with Josiah Jele and Jabo Malaketi. They wrote about why there was an ultra-left. And they used the example of the German anarchists that Lenin had been bothered by. And they actually did say Dennis Brutus is the ultra-left problem in 2002 because of the World Summit on Sustainable Development. Dennis was with APF then. We will take Santon. His former student was on the platform at the WSSD in front of the convention center. His name, Aesop Bahad. And he said, Dennis the Menace, you must go home because we're building a new society. And then Dennis was very happy when I think all of you, I think Ahmed especially, pushed Aesop off that platform on August 31, 2002. A very quick point, if it's still okay, because you are worried about whether the APF had the, let me say, the stamina and the geographical inspiration, given it was a global scale movement of critics of privatization, especially after that 9/11 bombing, when we lost the global justice movement. APF carrying on with the Zapatistas in Mexico and with other forces that we could say, well, it's still a local set of struggles. However, nationally, do you remember you came to Durban, where I was living from 2004? It was in 2006 for the social movements in Daba. And of course in Durban, but especially Cape Town, where the Anti-Privatisation Forum, the Western Cape Anti-Eviction Campaign was falling apart. And therefore, a requirement for building that national movement was to have the APF helping to give us solidarity and action against capitalist globalization. So it was a very high profile and a very important event. It failed. And I can very quickly finish, if you allow. The lessons of the APF are also lessons at every host academic site, because we were hosting that meeting, do you remember? At University of KwaZulu-Natal, our Center for Civil Society. And we had a lot of conflict there. And I think some of it you could probably identify within APF circuits and the intellectuals that serve your movement. I'll just tell you what are 10 lessons, because Dennis Brutus insisted that we take lessons about scholar activism, a sort of an ethics checklist. So let me tell you the 10 sins, if just for 2 seconds. 10 sins that I commit, I did commit, I still commit, and that I think helps explain why that was not a success when you try to bring a national perspective. Firstly, some of our scholar activists, we would tell this to all the people coming through the Center for Civil Society, are guilty of gatekeeping or hijacking. A researcher takes ownership of a movement, its interpretation, even access, to the extent sometimes of cultish control freak management. Second, substitutionism. Trotskyists in the House know that word. Replacing, not augmenting, the local understanding with the researcher's understanding, vision, or aspirations, even when on-ground realities are an obvious contradiction. And a part of that, the worst part, is ventriloquism. Is anybody in the House guilty of that? I am. Replacing local phrasing with a researcher's own words in press releases and articles and statements of demand, teaching a movement faddish academic language. Fourth, where is Ahmed? Because that's actually where we had these debates at UKZN, where Ahmed and Prashani were students. Trevor was a student. Careerism through parasitism, exploiting information gained without reporting back or turning benefits back to the base, or generating self-serving, contradiction-free interpretations. Technicism or legalism. Okay, APF taught us about this in the Coalition Against Water Privatization. Was it the Mazabuko versus Joburg Water, right? Sometimes necessary, legalism, to contest enemies' technicism, but too often incapable of comprehending movement realities and usually causing de-radicalization or co-optation. Fifth is divisiveness, favoring. A sixth, well, divisiveness speaks for itself. Hucksterism. Anybody gone on record romanticizing the APF? Well, we did that a lot. Adventurism, escalating the tensions between the state and the grassroots. Score settling, importing our own researchers' petty internecine rivalries. Ninth, the failure of analytical nerve, an inability, often due to fear, to draw out the fully liberatory potentials of the movement. And finally, 10th, betrayal, turning against the movement on dubious grounds, giving inside information to enemies, or accepting the most fatuous arguments or assumptions that undermine the cause. Anyway, I thank Dennis Brutus for always forcing us to be honest, looking in the mirror and saying, well, petty bourgeois penetration of these movements has some serious problems.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, and just to make, by the way, welcome to Boko. Comrade Tebogo, who just walked in, was the first APF administrator, working with the APF and right from the beginning. Nice to have you here with us. We were just finishing off the talking of the middle years, sort of, we started with the some of the challenges, some of the problems. And I just wanted to say in relation to what Patrick and that 2006 was that we walked into a hornet's nest already that was there in UKZN, in which we had no idea about what was going on there between academics fighting each other and everything else. So yes, some of those lessons that academics and others I think are well taken. John, you wanted to come back and give some perspectives. I think maybe you're also engaging some of the things that comrades have said. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a bit of a little break for a little food, and then we're going to come back for the final little session. Thank you.
Maybe the APRE was a kind of beginnings of testing out a perspective for the historical period, because I think all the issues that were flagged in the APF are current issues for the working class. And I think it centers around the question of which social forces are the anchor for the struggle against neoliberalism, the form of capitalism now. I think the issue of the whole process of the restructuring of the working class through this process of neoliberalism, the casualization, the labor brokering, precarious forms of employment, and the high levels of unemployment that are existing there, and the forces amongst the working class that are really fighting and resisting neoliberalism. I think if you look back, and even now, are these communities, the unemployed, the precarious forms of workers? And I think this has been the issue, I think, that is at the center or at the heart of the strategic differences between people. There are the comrades who center their political orientation and their politics on the trade unions, that the trade unions are the anchor of any kind of movement, and therefore all other movements, all other expressions and organizing of the working class are really not, they are important, but they are not the center. They are not key. And I think, and that is one of the reasons why I think we were struggling in the APF to really understand how to build that movement of the unemployed, of the precarious, that mounted the first break from the ANC and its politics. Those were the social forces that mounted that break, not the trade unions, not Kusatu. I mean, they were trying to discredit us and block us and all of that kind of thing. So then, therefore, the question of the kind of strategies, the kind of organizational building, the development of our activists, how we do all those kind of things become important strategic questions. That's what the unions did in the 1970s. Because in the 1970s, the migrant workers in the hostels were the vanguard of the trade union movement. Not the workers in the townships, but the migrant workers. And the unions found ways of how to organize that layer, how to make sure that layer anchors the union movement in terms of the thing. So, and here maybe when comrades say that the APA was not strong enough to, and therefore maybe the circumstances led to its, inevitable demise. I think for me it's maybe too, I think it does not allow us to, because yes, the APF, I mean, with those communities, etc., and unemployed, because there were lots of high turnover of activists. Because of the fact that they're unemployed, they can't sustain themselves, they can't be in the movements all the time. They get jobs, they move on, or they move elsewhere to find jobs. So there was, because sometimes you find in one coordinating committee from another coordinating, different comrades will come to meetings, because you can't, I mean, they don't come to the, there's no continuity in terms of the activists and people who come. So therefore, what happened in previous meetings were not there. So those are important sort of questions that I think that it's still required even today, that we need to grapple with those issues. because relying that somehow the unions and Kusatu and those ones are going to be the barriers of a new politics and a new vision at a moment. They are not there. They were not even there in that time. They were not there. And despite them being attacked by a new liberalism and all of that. So, and I think that's, and therefore there was this underplaying and undervaluing and what these movements were really about and their experiences, because their experiences of Kusatu is different from our understanding of what Kusatu was in the 1980s. The militants communities could see that workers are not fighting in the townships. You know what I mean? So you had to find ways of dealing with that experience. That there's not a Kusatu that they see struggling with them, or workers that are unionized that are struggling with them in the townships. You know? So the question of unity, of supporting a strike, is not something automatic. Yeah. So you had to find ways of and understand that experience, and not to say that experience is not a valuable experience. We must make sense of what that experience is saying, and how, because that's how people speak. That's how the working class speak, and that's how he forms his consciousness and his development and build his organizations. So, I mean, let me leave that point. And I think it's probably going to be, especially in the coming period, I can see even now, with the Communist Party and Kusatu talking about a popular front of the left and stuff like that, and trying to win over organizations to become part, and how we're going to relate to that issue, how movements are going to relate to that question. It's coming again, you know, those kind of things. I think the other, so it was not a question, I think it was not a question of you can't have a tactical, alliance. It's what Kusatu around a particular issue or support a particular strike, etc. Is your strategic orientation of where you see the forces for change, the militants, where are the militants at the moment who are resisting, who are organizing, etc., and what they represent, and how you can then build a movement with those particular forces. That is the quick question. Now, how you form tactical issues with other organizations of the working class, it's another question. But I think that's the key issue here for me. Then I think the second point, I think is important, and I think for all of us, is an organizational politics. How do we deal with internal organizational politics, like differences? How do we deal with differences when there are differences? And how do we accommodate them? How we've allowed them to have an expression within the organization? And how we can learn from other organizations where they allow for platforms, you know, movements allow for platforms within the organization and all of that. Because clearly we do know from experience that this thing of having a one-liner, you know, political line is not a sustainable thing for the working class. But how do we then deal with differences, and how do you accommodate it within a movement, and how you find organizational expression for those things? I think it's some of the things I think we need to define. And I think maybe I think this issue that you're raising about struggle for control of an organization to allow for certain political positions to have hegemony is always there now. And I think maybe what we have not appreciated is that we as old activists from the 80s and 90s, I think, and maybe it's also linked to the first point, is where we had our own ideas and our own formulation and political perspectives. How do you without you imposing, without you trying to, artificially compress a movement to come to where you are and allow for that kind of organic development of a politics of a movement, which can adopt and incorporate your own things. Maybe just as a concrete illustration of that, the point that you're raising, Ahmed, that I think I'm more autonomous. You know what I mean? But for me, what the people are saying in terms of some of their perspectives, for me, it's how it relates to what the experiences and what is required at that point in time, because of one's understanding of the expressions of the movements and what's required for that particular movement, that you can appropriate from other perspectives and not be stuck to your your perspective. Yeah, no, that kind of thing, because that's how your own politics and your own perspectives get enriched, because truth is always concrete, theory is always concrete, and it's the concrete experiences and the developments and the struggles that reinforces, develop, and changes your theory, and then you apply it again, it gets enriched. It's that kind of what the Marxists call the dialectical interaction that I think is important. And I think for me that, and part of it is also the organizational politics.
Okay, thanks, John. This is exactly what we wanted to surface, all these different, there's so many different things that are coming up that we're thinking about, that not just about the past, but right now, and how they relate to what we're doing as well in the present. So what we're going to do now is, just around the corner, there's some yummy Nando's. Yes, I think most people like Nando's, I think. And just get yourself a little bite, have a little break. I'm asking, please, it's now 20 minutes after 2. So we're going to take about 15 minutes or so. If you want to bring it back in here, we're going to try, we don't have to go all the way to 4, but what we're going to do is we're going to have a final session, which is going to look at the sort of last part of the APF and maybe pick up some of these questions about how that influences what has come after the fact and now the situation we're in. Please come back. Don't leave us. Those of you online, thank you for being patient as well, and we'll take about a 15-minute break. Thanks. Patience, and thank you for joining us again. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we've already begun to talk and raise quite a number of issues that sort of come into that last part of the APF. But I think there's a few things I wanted to sort of highlight. And I think one of them comes from some of the comments that John made in relation to the character of the movement itself, and how by the time 2008, 2009, those late 2000s had rolled around, the impact of casualization of neoliberalism on a whole range of fronts, both in terms of basic services in the communities themselves, in terms of the crushing of, I don't think we've even talked really about the crushing of dissent. There was a calculated and systematic program for over 10 or 15 years to smash dissent. And by smashing it, I don't mean necessarily physically taking people out, although that was something that happened particularly during the water wars and afterwards. I mean, we can give examples where, for example, just to, the practical exigencies of trying to run a movement where comrades are like, I remember we had debates around this. To move over a little bit. Okay. We had debates around this, around whether or not, when you make a call and you go and you fight in the streets and you do things, there are consequences. In particular, to give you one example, one of our comrades in Soweto was sentenced to 10 years. 10 years in prison for breaking a pipe, a water pipe. And the only way that we were able to, he was either 10 years in prison or 50,000 Rand fine. We paid 50,000 Rand in order so the comrade wouldn't spend the next, well, it would probably have been half that, but with good behavior, whatever, but several years, let's say. And at one point, 80% of the entire APF budget was being used for bail. So these are the practical exigencies that sometimes get lost in the political debates, everything. The things that practical necessary to, you call comrades out onto the streets, you call them to struggle, you cannot abandon them when the shit hits the fan. Because otherwise it's just empty rhetoric and there's radicalizing posturing. And in that case, a lot of the practical things that happened were becoming more and more and more difficult in those last years. But that aside, and of course, and by the way, it's just important to note that throughout the entire APF's history, we only had one funder of note, one, War on Want, which was in the UK, and which never really told us what we could and couldn't do. This debate about, being controlled by money and energy really never came into the picture with the APF. We were never told, no, you can't use it for this or that. They were very flexible. And in fact, one of the reasons why we didn't get money from others was precisely because of that, because of the politics of funding. The Coalition Against Water Privatization got some funding from, of all areas, the Unitarian Church in the United States, by the way. For anybody who knows the Unitarians, they're a fairly wealthy small group of people, but they pretty much do their hands off. So that's where if you want to think about where the funds came from, it was one basic source, and there was no real problems there in relation to War on Want telling us. Where we did have problems was when there were some people that sat on the board of War on Want who were from the unions in the UK who accused the APF of being anti-ANC and anti-liberation and tried to defund us. So the unions in the UK were against the APF. In that context, we fought off that battle and we lost it, but a lot of comrades didn't know that there was a behind-the-scenes move by ANC people to get us defunded through using their contacts in the old anti-apartheid movement, particularly in the UK, to do that, but that never happened. But I wanted to turn the attention towards what I consider to be probably one of the turning points. I think a lot of these debates that happened were cumulative and everything, but there were two. It was the rape case. This fundamentally changed everything. And let me just revive your memories, if comrades who don't know about this and who forget what actually happened, because I think it's important for us to surface it, be very honest and direct about these. And that was the one thing, by the way, that we can look back with pride as the APF. We were the only movement, and as far as I know, still are one of the only mass movements that came completely up front and center and publicly and let everybody look in the front door and say, this is exactly what happened. We're not going to hide anything. We're not going to try to protect anybody. We are going to be honest about this because it is an absolute, not only what happened and the rationalizations for that, but also it was around when Ramoho and a lot of the women within the APF were raising a whole range of absolutely legitimate and central questions about patriarchy, about gender-based violence, about lack of safe spaces, about a whole range of other things that were there, which were often pushed and marginalized into the sidelines because of the bigger strategic debates about where the APF was going. These small things, what seems to be small, were fundamental. They were absolutely fundamental. And this is where I think, why I'm using the rape case, because I think things broke down. A movement is only as good as the relationships it builds amongst itself, amongst its own activists, the relationships. If the relationships are constantly toxic and constantly competitive and they're going to break down sooner or later, and that's going to happen. But when I say relationships, it's like a personal relationship. If you have a good personal relationship, the fundamental bedrock of any relationship is honesty. If you can't trust each other, the relationship doesn't work. It simply doesn't. It'll sooner or later catch up with you. And that was what this rape case brought out in full view. I mean, there were, you could have people going after each other individually and organization, whatever, but sometimes, I mean, despite all of our, for example, I used to joke with comrades in Keep Left, and despite, all of our sometimes, quite vociferous disagreements, we always came back into the end, We were comrades. We moved. We had our disagreements and everything, but we never treated each other as enemies or somebody to be crushed in that sense. The rape case, what happened was, here's what happened, just for those of you who just need to be reminded. Our three main organizers, the APF organizer, the regional organizer, and the organizer for the Coalition Against Water Privatization, all younger men, were basically accused. And we had a sex worker who came to us and basically said that they had taken her into a room and had gang raped her. And that even though not all of them had participated in the same way, they were all part of that gang rape, whatever they did or did not do individually. And this came to our attention. Of course, I'm not going to go through all the details of what happened, but the APF went through its own process, suspended the comrades, went through its own investigation. What was very sad, and it was when that investigation happened, of what it did and brought up to the surface of all the contradictions in the APF. There were many women in the APF who defended the comrades, who defended them, who said, no, we shouldn't be talking about this. Why are you doing this? It's a class thing, it's a this, it's whatever, not basically to try to that. There were many men who did the same thing. There were some men who tried to sabotage the investigation into the comrades, basically. We found out that one of the comrades had offered the woman hush money, which is eventually what happened. And that particular individual went on to become a MP, initially for the EFF, and then all of those comrades went to the EFF initially, and then they went to the what? MK and PA, I think Patriotic Alliance and other things. Anyway, that was what happened afterwards. But the whole point of the rape case was what it brought to the surface was the fact that despite all of our debates and all of the things, I think if we had have, for example, everybody in the APF had agreed on a strategic line of march, great, but we'd have still had these problems, fundamental problems of relational and and misogyny and dishonesty and trying to cover up and not wanting to deal with things and treating the organizational resources as ATMs. I'm going to be direct, honest. I was the treasurer for 8 years in the APF. And I can tell you that the amount of times that I was attacked personally for withholding money because it was our money. We can do whatever we want with our money without any accountability, without anything. We just go and spend it however we want. And to hold a line on that, to understand that that's something that all progressives and left have to take seriously, is when you have whatever resources, wherever they're coming from or however they're managed, they have to be you have to hold accountability. Otherwise, you will get what happened, exactly what happened to ANC, exactly what happened to APF. A scramble to get as much as you can, as quick as you can, and to basically run the organization down, which is precisely what happened. Out of that rape case, things sort of completely fractured in many ways after that inside the APF. And there became camps that were almost, intent on, I would say, destroying the APF from within. It was their agenda. And the way that they were going to do that was to basically take positions within the executive and then basically take the money and do whatever they wanted with the money. So that within a matter of a year and a half, 2 years, the APF was completely bankrupt. Completely. After building up a reserve, by the way, of almost R1 million. And R1 million in 2009 was no small change. I can tell you. That took 8 years to do. It took 6 months to go. That's all it took. And so those things led to the eventual demise of the APF in many ways, I would argue. There are other issues, obviously. I'm not trying to just say that that was the singular one, but I think it was fundamental because what it surfaced was something for me, which I wrote about, and I said a personal reflection. And the personal is political, is that one of the things that we oftentimes overlooked, and because of our, I think, political culture, oftentimes, where we came from, what we were taught in organizations, was that you separate these two things out. That you can, that a man can seriously, in all seriousness, a man can get up in an APF meeting and say, viva the workers and viva women and Panzi gender-based violence, and then can go home and beat up his girlfriend and his wife. And nobody's going to know about it, and nobody's going to do anything about it, and nobody's going to say anything about it, because that's the personal. And now I'm in the political side of things. Or treat the organizational resources as your personal piggy bank, while at the same time talking about accountability of the ANC and the fact that our politicians are not accounting to the people and are not doing these things, but you don't want to have the same principles and values in your own organization. These things are fundamental. They're not peripheral. They are fundamental to any organization. And I think one of our biggest mistakes was that we always concentrated predominantly on these huge, big debates and questions and everything, and we left people behind in the personal side of things because they felt marginalized. They felt not listened to, particularly women in many cases. And when things happened and when things went wrong, people who, just like what happens to whistleblowers in our government, what happens to when you blow the whistle? You get punished. You get vilified. You get marginalized. You don't get, so well done, comrade, for being honest. Well done. Thank you. This is the kind of politics we want. That's what it means to be progressive. That's what it means to be radical. So we oftentimes, in many ways, and I think in the APF, we misunderstood what it really means to be radical, what it means to be a militant. It's not just about having a particular ideological perspective and having a line of march and being able to organize and everything. It's about the way that you conduct your personal and organizational life and how you relate to other people. That's what being a militant is in many ways. And I think we forgot that and we let that lesson move and it destroyed us. Excuse me. 2 last comments before we open it up. And these are more positive comments. So we've identified a lot of the weaknesses, we've identified a lot of the problems. But I want to end on a note because I think one of the reasons why we're here 15, 17 years later still talking about the APF is because it's still here with us in some way. This is what Bricks was saying. It's not about the APF is still alive as an organization, but it's alive as an experience, as an idea, as a reflection, as something like looking back and saying, wow, despite all of its problems, despite all of those things, it was it was unique. It was a space that had all sorts of potential. And I wanted to say there are 4 things that I identified when I looked over all 69,000 pages of documentation in this archive, if not more, probably 80,000. Massive amounts of stuff that happened over those 12-year period. And if you look through it all, which I went pretty much through most of it, I pulled out 4 things that I would say that the APF was able to really contribute at the end of the day and take away as a legacy. 1, it was at the forefront of creating a new organizational voice for those who had been socially, economically, and politically marginalized. It created that not just within the APF, but for many other people who formed a lot of other organizations and movements across the country who were inspired by the APF, or at least some of the messages and others. And intellectuals as well. The APF produced a huge amount of organic intellectuals that went on to become, many of them, academics, researchers, writers, and other places, and that still rings and still has impact. 2, it instilled a new sense of collective activism and a new demand for social and political redress amongst marginalized, poor, casualized workers and unemployed communities, the very thing. That voice had been completely sidelined for the most part, organizationally and politically. And the APF brought it. With all its contradictions, with all its messiness, it brought it to the surface. And what we see today and what we've seen in the last 15 years is the progeny of that partially, in all its messiness as well. 3, it helped shift the terrain of political and social engagement and debate in South African society as a whole, and expanded the boundaries of democratic politics and representation beyond the status quo framework. That was probably being a little bit too generous, but it's basically trying to say that what it did is it raised a range of ideas and debates and other things amongst progressives that were very important and that went on to inform a lot of things. Wherever they went, it was beyond the control of the APF, but I think it left an indelible mark on that front. And finally, it managed to effect shifts and this, sometimes we just forget this. On the practical front, it did effect shifts on some very specific socioeconomic policies and other things in favor of the poor and the working class. The very fact that I would argue, the very fact that we do not have a situation in South Africa as messed up as we are, as screwed up as the state enterprises are, but that we don't have wholesale privatization across the board in every single, as partly as a result of our struggles, of defeating that struggle. We forget we did, as much as we can criticize the strategy and tactics and other things of the water struggles, we prevented Suez Lyonnaise from getting a 25-year, they would still been in control of Joburg water today, as messed up as it is still. But these things count. They provided space. We defended a line of democratic dissent in many ways as well. Okay? The fact that we still, 20 years later, that you still can basically, we can have this debate. We can criticize, we can say things, we can say the Ramaphosa is an asshole. And I'm not going to get arrested tomorrow, you know, or whatever it is that we want to say. These things are important. If we look around the world right now, the space is closing, comrades, everywhere. The fascists are on the move. They're there. So one thing that the APF and that legacy shows us is that if we defend the spaces, sometimes we might not win the battles, but we defend the spaces just as important to hold a line. And we have and contributed to holding that line. So I just wanted to end that sort of sense of that there were, you know, the organization did not continue. It did collapse, but it left a range of different legacies and indelible marks that I think we can take a note of. And I'm sure I'm not even covering half of them. But I'm going to open it up now to some more engagement and looking at, and I'm asking comrades now maybe not to, I mean, you can talk about that last period and make your reflections, but I'm also asking you to make some reflections on looking in the forward sense of the APF and what it left and maybe some of the more things and what that means for us today. Because we are in a situation right now, we are looking back and we are remembering, but we're in a situation right now which is very, very difficult on so many fronts. And as progressives, as lefties, whatever you want to talk, revolutionaries, however we want to call ourselves in these things, it's a duty of ours to be able to continue to think, to organize, to debate, to do these things. And here's a little space where we can maybe share some of those ideas. Okay, floor is open. Alan. Oh, you have to move. Okay, sorry, Bricks did say he has to go pick his wife at the airport. Sorry, thank you, Comrade Bricks, for joining us. What? Bricks, just hold on 1 second. What did you want to say?
Okay, so look, you guys, 1, 2, 3, 4, you are to blame for the collapse of APF, and I was going to say that. Can you see? And I think today is an exercise of rewriting history. Can you see? And I've got some specific things to say. For example, we deal with the money, you know, positions. So please, we have to be honest if we want to clear the air. Okay, yeah.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, I'm not going to go down that road. But one of the things that the APF did, and I specifically SEC and TCCC, is save the working class of this country billions in terms of motivating to reconnect yourself. Take the water, take the electricity. It has saved the work. Because there's people. I say, hey, my comrade Trevor, he started this, man. He saved the working class billions. Okay, and that was one of the campaigns that the APF was involved in. Switch on the power yourself, reconnect yourself, take that water yourself. And I'm proud of being associated with that.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. I think good afternoon, comrades. In addition to what Comrade Allen is saying, this is also something, because of what APF was doing, this is still continuing in the communities, you know, the struggle for prepaid water meters. People are resisting electricity cutoffs. You'll remember the moratorium. This is because of 96, 98 people who were arrested at Kensington, you know, where we're destroying the prepaid meters. And even these comrades that you are referring to, they took, you know, we're making a joke with my comrade here and comrade Jabu that they actually took what APF stood for and turned it into their manifesto. And they used it to campaign, you know, with the EFF and all of that, you know what I mean? And this is the work that the APF has done in these communities. And you know, I always say, so I'm now active in the gender-based violence space. And one thing that I always say is that when people say men are trash, you know, I stand proudly to say I was groomed by men in the APF, you know, who gave me the courage to stand up. Today I can articulate myself, I can stand up and challenge whatever narrative that is being put there. And this is because of, you know, your comrade Dale, comrade Trevor, Alan, all these comrades that are in the APF. So this is why when people say men are trash, I'm like, hey, not all men are trash, but I know of men who, you know, who sort of like laid a foundation for me, because I joined the APF when I was 18, fresh from high school, with comrade Trevor in Pimville. And this is because the electricity was cut off at home, you know, and I had nothing to do, struggling with funding. And since then, I learned a lot in the APF, and not just me. There are a lot of comrades, Disebo and others, who also joined in, you know. So as much as, and yes, I agree with comrade Trevor, yes, we, perhaps I also contributed in what happened to the APF. We all had, I think, had a role to play in the collapse of the APF. Maybe some more and others less, but we all contributed to the collapse of the APF. I mean, I was in a relationship with one of the people who were accused of rape, you know, and also one of the women who at some point were saying, no, he couldn't have. You know, how's that possible? You know what I mean? I mean, this is someone that I'm living with. This is the father of my child, you know, things like that. So you'd imagine that also for me, it was even worse because this was the father of my child, you know, but at some point I had to take a decision to say, you know, if for people to accuse you of such things, then you must have done it. You know what I mean? So it's yeah, we all went through, I think, a lot in the process, but also we learned. We learned, and some comrades, because of the learnings in the APF that we got in the APF, some, you know, even got employment, you know what I mean? You know, things like, so it wasn't, you know, as much as we were challenging, you know, the ANC government, the systems and all of that, there were also, the organization also contributed in empowering comrades, you know, also giving them opportunities where they would stand in platforms and speak about their own struggles, you know. And this is something that I think APF encouraged a lot, to say, you know, it's nothing about us without us. You know, if we are going to speak about Tembelihle people must be there to speak for themselves. If it's Soweto electricity crisis, Soweto people and all of those things. So yeah, personally, I do appreciate the space that we have been given to reflect. But yeah, we do need to be honest, comrades. Thank you, comrades.
Okay. We got Lawrence and we got Amit. Okay. And I'm just going to make an appeal to comrades in this session. The one thing that this, and we remember we're doing this in memory of Prashani, and about the remembering nature of these things. There is no one, each of us has our own perspectives, our own opinions, our own things, and we're going to differ and we're going to argue. We're not here to win. Nobody's here to win a position or to say my position is the correct one, you are wrong. Whatever. We're going to disagree, and that's the remembering side of it. So I'm just appealing to comrades as they engage everything else, is that we do that in that spirit. Doesn't mean we can't have disagreements, but we're not here to try to then, you know, take and start saying you. Okay.
Thanks. I mean, I want to start with not so much the issue of the collapse of the APF, but what we lost. So even if, you know, we can say, well, the APF is still here, so on, what we lost was a flow for multiple tendencies to build a framework of mass struggle in the city. That was building, and we don't have that. There have been other kind of activist forums that have emerged and so on. And, many of the constituent parts of the APF are around in some form. So Keep Left is still there. I understand the SG is still around. It's within kind of communities, people continue to organize. And in truth, we also built, and this is something else that we lost, is we lost a school for militants, a place that was building a layer of militants that was actively, like listening to the Boho now, I mean, like, this was a place, I didn't get a PhD and go into Wits because I went to university, you know what I mean? I kind of, my school was, the APF. And the debates that came up kind of sharpened a desire for practical intellectual work, and we don't have that. So I'd like us also, in remembering the APF, to try and remember it by, creating a new space for us to be members of. And I want to just kind of, I agree, you know what I mean, that the factionalism, you know what I mean, was a big part of how the APF disappeared. But I also think that at this moment, it is precisely for us to recognize that we can still sit in this room. Like we had the fees must fall thing recently, and there were some people who stayed away precisely because things had kind of the implosion of the fees must fall movement after 10 years had still not allowed a space for comrades to come together. So I'd like us to kind of, in our critique of each other, because I'm also anticipating whatever's coming from Trevor, right? In our critique of each other, is to still allow for that floor to open up. And so I want to suggest, and I don't know how we do this, but at least with this kind of APF grouping and maybe some more of us with young militants that are emerging in the city, if we don't kind of need some kind of activist forum just to start talking again about how we relate to the struggles that are unfolding, for instance, around water and so on, but also to be able to think strategically about what we're going to say about the bourgeois parties in next year's elections, or, so on. And it's precisely not to look towards some form of forum that reproduces the same. That is, that you all have to be, card-carrying members of this ideological tendency in order to be there. I think one of the strengths of the APF was precisely that it wasn't just, the small parties, wasn't just the community movements and so on. And there were multiple different modes of organizing that were tested and worked out. So that's what I'd like us to take away from this, a sense of what we lost, but also a desire that there is still space for us to find something else that kind of fills that vacuum. Sure.
Thanks, Ahmed. Claire, I've got you. Lawrence, I've got Kaiser. Okay. And Rob, I've got you down. Hold on. Okay. Got all the hands.
Sure. So just to agree with that, I think a space of political analysis that's broader than just ourselves would be really valuable, because I think also through disagreement sometimes is actually how we improve our ability to relate what we're trying to think about strategically to what's actually going on, right? It's a way also of sharpening our analysis. And just a small thing about the importance of that is this. I was looking at the APF page, which is on an archive now, and one of the second last things that got published in the last thing published in 2010 was Schubert Park residents say, you touch an immigrant, you touch a community. And I think that's kind of, for me, that sort of really emphasizes the depth of the importance of that political analysis that we did have, and the fact that we didn't just, go for the easiest things to agree on, but that we actually did take on a lot of those things, and thereby built, we built amongst ourselves quite a potential for quite a broad-minded approach to the issues that came, as what you were saying. You started over a cutoff and ended up with, with taking on the whole of patriarchy and sexism, and I mean, saying that, so I think also the question about having sorry to just keep picking up on your things, Ahmed, but having failed to build a framework for struggle in the city. So there are quite a lot of things going on at the moment, though. So there's this water thing that's been planned, which is, and things like the Usindiso survivors that Comrade General has been quite central in. As well as a lot of xenophobia going on in relation to also, I think, building up towards the next local government elections, that it's the easy scapegoat because you don't get punished at the polls if you attack immigrants. So just to remind us that there's already those spaces existing, but one of the things that's really hard working in them is that there's, at the moment, they kind of easily fall into either into being quite not having a lot of power, or fall quite easily into kind of reformist ideas that just then, that end up with us doing a lot of banging our heads against state institutions without really getting too much built on the ground. So the appeal, I guess, I want to make is that a space for political analysis, but also, these things are happening, and I'm sure there's a million other things in the room that people can talk about. And maybe it's also a space to start, that we need through that, is a space to start hooking up our struggles again in some kind of a way that can, start to again bring that broad way of looking at things, and trying to think about how we build a consciousness of, the best words I can come up with right now, of a community of fate amongst people in the city or in our areas of against politicians and capital and so on. Sure.
Thanks, Claire. Rob, and then I've got Lawrence, and then, Rob got you.
Greetings, comrades. I just wanted to say that, I support this thing of space to link our struggles. I think the early APF, and I can't speak for the later APF, it's curious, but one comrade came along and she said, the first time I came into the APF was when Rob was expelled. Now, Rob was voted out, but the way it was done in the experience of that comrade was reflective of an expulsion. And I think, to me, that hurt me a lot personally. But I think the way those methods of dealing with each other are problematic. And I frankly appreciate Ahmed talking about factionalism, even though you sort of quickly withdrew from that. But I appreciate that. So when we organize these things, it can't just be one faction organizing it. Let me make that point, okay? Then I wanted to say, look, Prashani was a great comrade. I differed with her politically. She was honest. She could listen. She had incredible integrity. She was an amazing comrade, and I will remember her for a long time. So I want to say that is aspirational. I wanted to say, and Dale, you raised it. So there's two leadership characters from the bureaucracy in Britain who sit on War on Want and say, no, you can't get funding because it's, you're anti-ANC. In what sense do they represent millions of workers in the unions? That's not the unions. That's the leadership, the bureaucracy in a union. In the same way that we acknowledge there were activists, let's call them by a different, fighting each other, a leadership fighting each other, while the masses on the ground are looking for a way forward. There's a difference. So this thing of COSATU, John, I mean, COSATU isn't just the bureaucracy at the top wanting to get rich and collaborate with the bosses. There are rank and file workers that we need to connect with. And surely that's what we need to be looking for, connecting with ordinary workers in struggle. So I wanted to make that point. Lastly, vanguards change, John. It's not just the casuals and the precarious. I mean, Marikana was decisive. That wasn't casual and precarious, you know. I know they were precarious in that way. And in the same way that migrant workers that historically built COSATU, they were pushed aside for other leadership. Vanguards change. Let's not construct millions of workers as the enemy. It's the bosses and the capitalist system. Amandla.
Thanks, Comrade John. Lawrence?
Thank you, thank you. I'm trying to think how many years did APF survive? It was formed in 2000 July at, I think, at Wits University. We are not sure when it finally collapsed, but my assumption is that 2010. It survived like 10 years. It survived 10 years. I'm not quite sure, but I think the archive deal will assist in terms of understanding that thing. However, you see, the death of APF was inevitable. A movement like APF, they are not meant to exist in perpetuity because the situation changes. When it collapsed in 2010, 2010 was not 2000. Like the situation was quite different, and people who were part of APF were not necessarily the same people who founded the APF. I think by that time when it collapsed, the founding comrades were were no longer in association or part of the APF in whatever form. It's not a good thing that the movement that has been at the forefront of struggle from below collapsed, because its slogan was home of the struggle. Its main strategy was to solve the key problem confronting the working class through various forms of struggle. It was not placing like illusion that through all other things like lobbying the elites who can get something like I think it's a sad thing that it has collapsed, because now, as other comrades have alluded, we then have an organization that is playing the role of APF. Is not there, is not happening. The hope was that if we hope that APF could have changed maybe its form, or maybe it could have gave birth to another organization, or now we are having an identical organization like APF, but that's not reality. I agree that APF won some gain, but in fairness, those gains were lost. Remember, if you win something in the struggle, your victory are not permanent, especially in capitalism. Through APF struggle or during the time of APF, privatization was like, if I'm making my rough estimate, was like 30%. Now is like 70%. The privatization is massive everywhere, everywhere. The ESCOM is privatized now. They are talking about unbundling ESCOM. The ANC and NEC, they've released an economic action plan. It's about widespread privatization, privatizing the ports, the rail system, privatizing everything. In the municipalities, privatization is everywhere. Now, and that thing of eviction is happening. When is happening? Mostly, there's no strong fight back. You see, now I'm trying to illustrate that now is worse than before. We've got xenophobia. Now, APF confronted xenophobia. I think I've forgotten the year, I think they had a serious march that was organized against xenophobia. Now we don't have a force that is fighting xenophobia. The, the now the xenophobes, the xenophobes, they are not being confronted. They are not being confronted by any organization. It's worse. Like in 2008, there was not a restriction of access to healthcare. It was now it's worse. I think we must be clear. Now, the main point is that it's unfortunate that a movement like APF collapsed because of whatever reason. We hope that tomorrow will give birth to a movement similar or bigger than APF, confronting all the problems that are facing our class. Thank you.
Can I ask comrades just to keep? We're going to run out, and we have a certain amount of time. We have to be out of here because there's another event that's happening. So we don't have. We had it up until 4. So yeah.
Thanks, comrades. My name is Arthur. I'm with the Spartacus South Africa organization. We put out Ama Bolsheviki Amnyama newspaper. I just want to say, I mean, I think we found it very valuable, this meeting we're having here today, as a retrospective, critically looking at your past. I don't want to go on forever about it, but I mean, I thought in particular the points about confronting a new political period really hit home. And also your point that you just made now about like the fascists are on the win. You know, they're on the roll. You know, internationally. I mean, I could quibble about whether they're fascists or I'm not going to do that. Okay, but the right wing is on the ascendant, and especially with these GNU ascendant in these elections. I mean, I think it's almost like a whole new period here in South Africa as well. And I mean, Trump, you know, got his guns pointed right at us. You know, we think we need to, you know, tell people, you know, we need to defend South Africa against Trump. And I mean, one of the things that our organization concluded, like what are the main tasks coming out of these elections in this new period, is that we have to focus on united front defense. And I mean, just in terms of, you know, talking about, you know, you can't be sent to jail for telling Ramaphosa we waged this year-long defense campaign of Kolani Koza. He's an EFF militant and trade unionist in Bombela, and he put out a TikTok video saying Ramaphosa must go, we should have a shutdown against the GNU, and they tried to put him away for terrorism. And I'm happy to report that all charges were dropped. The Hawks are still have their hands on his passport, and so we need to put some pressure. Even though all the charges are dropped, they need to give him his passport back. But one of the things I really want to motivate, which might be controversial, is that one of the tasks is all the left should come together and defend Julius Malema against these bogus gun charges. Because we think it's coming directly from the White House to the Comprador GNU government. It has nothing to do with gun safety or anything like that, but people should... One last point, we strongly agree with sentiment to have a forum to debate out these ideas, because that's also crucial. We need to unite and we need to debate. Our organization is co-sponsoring a debate among left groups on the question of the national question and class struggle, the tasks of revolutionaries, here at the Forge, November 15th. I'd like to encourage it's ourselves, the Black Republic newspaper, Solidarity Action Committee Collective, and the International Bolshevik Tendency. So we'd like to have as wide a debate as possible. Thank you.
Yes, come. Sorry, Kaiser, you did. My apologies.
Okay, no, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to speak on what you were saying about the fascist closing up. So I think already in an environmental space, that is what we are seeing with the killings of Bomanjangas and so on and so on. So it brings me back to what Comrade John was saying about tactical alliance. So I'm trying to reconcile that with the problem of shifting, ideological alliance, where, for an example, some of the basic questions will be, if I want, for an example, to be in alliance with a particular group, let's say, for an example, in the unions, then the question would be, what is going to be the contribution, for an example, of this group, in our struggle or in our objectives and so on. So the point I'm driving at here is that it is actually difficult for one, actually, to say we can actually learn from others and also do them. So because we are having some diverging point of views, like for an example, let's say when we look for an example in the mining issue, for an example, then there we've got the minister there, Kwede Mantashe, and then we've got NUM as the union that is organizing mine workers and so on. And then it is May Day, Workers' Day. He's talking there, the unions are there. And then somewhere the person is saying, we cannot maybe kill mining for fresh air. You get a picture? So already that is contradictory to what the environmental organizations are saying. And then the unions, for example, we don't know where they are. They are not even rebuking the guy or talking against the statement he has made. So that make it difficult for one to say maybe we can align ourselves with the unions and so on, because already we don't trust them. That is one thing, for an example, when it comes to, alliance. Thank you.
Comrade?
So I think mine is a very short one. From an outside, I think I was looking for the word. I think APF has created so much awareness around anti-privatization. I myself have been collecting, I think, posters, brochures from, so you might not be aware, but you did make us aware of certain things that we were not aware of. So yeah, thank you so much. And I guess that there's a lot of people who have such an archive around Gauteng, and yeah, so you continue to do the good work.
If you, by the way, if you have anything in your archive that you think needs to be conserved for history's purposes, please talk to us. It's open. That archive is open for everyone. And that's exactly what we wanted, is collect as many things, whatever they are, including, I mean, it's actually quite fascinating when you go through the archive, because things that we're talking about remembering, I don't even remember half the stuff that was there. So we can't, and it reminds you of that archive reminds you of a lot of those things. And that's why it's important, because left history and people's history always gets written out of history. And that's why it's so important. So it's beyond the APF. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't.
No, I won't. Okay, I've said what I have to say. So what I wanted to say really is just that Bricks was leaving and you guys were pressurizing me. Claire, say something quickly before. So I had to tell him what is in my heart, which is why we're also here in a way. But I think I support Comrade Lawrence. I do agree about, the positive gains, whatever. But I think what Lawrence is saying is that we cannot have a victory lap here. The collapse of the APF was a tremendous setback for the working class. Yeah. So what we need is maybe even more honest, collective self-reflection and criticism about where we went wrong. So I was just afraid that Comrade Briggs going to leave feeling good that, we dropped the ball, comrades. It's a fact. We dropped the ball. And all the talk about, yes, there were different tendencies. Yes, there are different tendencies working together. But the question is political method. Can you see? backstabbing is not the correct method. It cannot build an organization. So I won't go into details. But if we were to sit here and lay out, okay, I heard Comrade Ahmed saying, yeah, Trevor said something, I'm still so. But I'll challenge him, what did I say? But I can say, but you did this and this and this and this, and it's recorded. So I think that going forward, we have to be honest. Let's do some self-criticism and not, say we want to build a new movement or revitalize without learning the lessons of the past. Because what we're going to do, we're just going to repeat it. Yeah. But I agree with Comrade Tebogo. I'm not saying maybe only one side is to blame. We must take that collective responsibility, although some did more than others to contribute.
Yeah, I hope that this session, comrades, is precisely in that spirit. There was no attempt to try to not talk about anything. And comrades could talk about anything they wanted. And it's the first time in 15 years that anybody's even tried to do this. So it's a start. Yeah, it's a start. And thank you. And it's because if comrades wanted, to know where the impetus came from, it came from SWAP. It came from remembering Pashani and the fees must fall. So we tried to do this. And I can tell you once again, as any organizer knows, when you're trying to organize something, it's a thankless task. Because I spent hours and hours and hours on the emails and phone trying to track down comrades that are not here, that we didn't have contacts for, because there's no email or no cell phone number. There's comrades out there that were really crucial in the APF as affiliate activists that we don't have here. So this is a start. And I encourage other comrades who are part of the APF to also come on board that effort. Let's do it as a collective. It's fine. There's no opposition there at all. And then we can have a situation where there's even more, and comrades will bring new perspectives and new reflections from different components. So it's, and we also have a recording, yeah. And I would also encourage, comrades here as well as others to go to the archive. That was the whole purpose of the archive. So Trevor is right in saying that if you go to the archive, you can just see exactly. We have 8 pages, 10, 15, 20 pages of minutes from one coordinating committee in one weekend. Yeah, and how many of those were there? Probably about 60 or 70 of those meetings. So it's just incredible. And you can see it's pretty much recorded. And then you can get all those details and everything. And that's the part of the reason why sometimes spending 2 or 3 hours is completely inadequate, because we can only touch the surface of certain things and we can't get into those. So let's do that both. Otherwise, it's in that spirit and of criticism, but also obviously recognition and affirmation at the same time. And remembering, as one of the comrades said, very importantly, I think it was Alan, who said, remembering all the comrades who've fallen along the way that are no longer with us in our struggles. So it's within that comments I wanted to say thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time. It's a Saturday. I know there's a lot of other things going on. To come here, spend your time, give this. The points have been noted. I will certainly try to, just on a personal basis, has nothing to do with organization or anything like that, but try to maybe bring some of the other APF comrades together, and let's maybe have a round 2. And try to spread it out, because I think there's comrades in here in the room who could get in touch with other people as well that we don't even know about or know where they are. Tebogo, I know I was trying to get these things. And so there are people out there that, and otherwise. So it's in that spirit, we'll do that. And then we can also talk about, both reflecting but also moving, as the comrades are saying. There's certain things are not, struggles doesn't stop. These things happen. There's interesting discussions going on, debates, other things. We need to always reflect and engage. Thank you again, comrades. Have a good, safe weekend. And a luta continua. Amandla! Viva the APF! Viva! Okay, thank you, comrades. And thank you for all of those online. Thank you for staying with us all this last 4 hours almost. Appreciate it. Thank you.